Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel, our new narrative. And today I'm presenting episode 2 in the series within the podcast called Things I Wish I Also Learned in February. And today's title is Love, Servitude, and Profits. And the subject is interracial marriage in colonial Maryland. So I want to put some context, before I get to the actual story, I want to put some context to the time period, the cultures, and the institution of slavery during that time. So let's talk about slavery first. If you have listened to my previous podcast, you know now that slavery has been around or walked alongside human beings throughout our history as a species of people. So you can go trace the institution of slavery all the way back 9,000 years, basically 7,000 years before Jesus walked the earth. You see slavery in Egypt, before Egypt, after Egypt, Greek civilization, Roman civilization, Chinese civilization, African civilization, everywhere in the world, right? And there's a bright line I would like to draw. And it's the year 1776. And that was the first time any organizations really got together to oppose the institution of slavery. Now, you always had people opposed to being a slave, right? And you always had people opposed or feeling sorry for the slave. But slavery, if we do ourselves a disservice by judging slavery, especially in the past, with a modern day morality, meaning, today everyone's appalled about slavery. I mean, it's hard to even say the word without someone getting offended or something. So, but if you think 1200 AD, 4000 BC, I mean, it was just a part of the human experience. And the only people who cared about the institution of slavery was those making profits from it and those trying to get out of it. And oftentimes you will find in history that slaves, when they got free, oftentimes enslaved other people. So I just want to give context to the institution. And this story happens about 100 years before 1776. So we're talking about a situation in colonial Maryland in 1663, right? About 100 years before there's any abolitionist society or any groups of people trying to oppose the institution of slavery, right? Now, that said, who are the people, who are the actors in this story? Well, you have the Negro slave and you have the free white women and you have people who passed the laws regulating that society. Well, who are the people who were passing the laws in colonial Maryland, in particular in colonial America, and in particular, colonial Maryland? Well, I'll tell you. In this great book I have here, background, Albion Seed by David Fisher, he talks about 4 distinct cultures who migrated to America. And the 2 I want to talk about today are the Cavaliers and the Puritans. And you can mix Quakers in there, but according to Albion Seed, the Quakers were a distinct culture. But anyway, the big difference between the 2 cultures and people were the Cavaliers had a very hierarchical viewpoint on life. And I'll give you an example. So God had all the liberty. The king had a little less than God. Then the nobility had a little less than the king. And then, so forth and so on until you get down to the servants who had a little bit more liberty than the slave who had no liberty. That was how things were. And that's pretty much how things was throughout the history of the world, right? Now, what was new was the mindset or the novel ideas coming out of the Puritan and Quaker society, which was more egalitarian, more flat. And so they were the first to see that hey, this institution of slavery is abhorrent. A man or woman should be able to profit off his own labor and not, someone else. So you have these two conflicting cultures in colonial America at the time. So at the time this law passed in 1663, the one I'm talking about, subject matter here today, it was mainly the Cavaliers in charge running Maryland. And so that law that they passed basically tried to dissuade free white women from marrying Negro slaves. Now, what that should tell you is if they bothered to actually meet to pass a law against interracial marriage, there was interracial marriage. So the law basically said that if a free white woman, free or indentured servant, married a Negro slave, she would become a slave to her husband's master or mistress for the duration of his life, and their children would be slaves for life. That's a hard price to pay for love, but no one went into that marriage knowing that, right? Back in 1663, who could read? I mean, there's very few people who could read and write and very few people who knew the law. So, a lot of people just stumbled into that. They fell in love and then just got caught up in that. But what was very interesting is what happened in 1682. The legislature revisited that law because, hey, it didn't work. People were still getting married. Love conquers all. You can be prejudiced all you want. Somebody loving somebody, right? So the law in 1682 that was passed was set the white women free. If they had become slave due to the prior law, they were set free in 1862. So were their children, and all of the masters and mistresses who were playing matchmaker. If going forward, if they continued to play matchmakers for their own profit and greed, basically, they would be fined 10,000 pounds of tobacco. And that fine applied to ministers who conducted the ceremony. And so you may say, where's the profit and greed? Well, here it is, plain and simple. You had masters and mistresses playing matchmaker to get extra slaves. So you can just imagine, the master or mistress sitting on a porch and some free white woman comes around and her eyes fall on some dude in the field. And her gaze holds it a little longer. And then the master or the mistress is like, "Ooh, I see you checking them out. Y'all might make a nice couple." And she's like, "Oh, really? You think so?" "Yeah, well, blah, blah, blah." Next thing you know, they married. Next thing she knows, she's a slave. Next thing they know, their children are a slave. So what does this mean overall in the context of things? I always say, you need to protect yourself. Learn to read and write. I'm sure everybody listening to this does, but this is an example of being ignorant can really cost you. And another thing, love conquers all, and prejudice has never been stronger than profits. So I don't care how prejudiced these people may have been. I can't believe this white woman is marrying this black slave. Well, if they saw the opportunity to get another slave out of that white woman, you see how things go. All right, that's it for today. I want to throw up where I got most of this information from as far as the laws from Maryland. And that's out of one of my favorite books right now. It is The History of Slavery and the Slave Trade. Now, this book was written in 1859. Am I right? Yeah, 1859 by William O. Blake. It's voluminous. I mean, it's about, 900 pages. If you like thick books, it's thick. And it was written basically, to give you some context, to 1859. It was written, that's about a few years before America's Civil War. And the book goes all the way back to basically slavery in Rome, Greece, Athens, through modern day. It talks about the slave trade, goes all the way up through, I think, up to almost the Civil War. So if you need a thick book to read, highly recommend it. All right, till next time. Bye.